I won $39 million and blocked my own mother. Sounds crazy, I know. If I were an outsider, I'd probably think the same. What kind of child turns their back on their own mother right after hitting the jackpot? But life isn't as simple as a winning lottery ticket. And honestly, the biggest shock after I won $39 million wasn't the number. It was the way I started seeing every relationship around me with new eyes. That morning was just as dull as every other day. I stood in my cramped kitchen, staring at the old coffee maker as it dripped, one slow drop at a time. It was lightly raining, the sky a dull gray. Outside the window was a parking lot filled with cars I never dared to dream of owning. While waiting for the coffee, I opened the drawer to find a spoon. And there it was, the lottery ticket I had bought on Friday, totally on a whim. I still remember that day. It was after work. I was exhausted, and I thought, I've never tried my luck before, so why not? I picked up the ticket, unlocked my phone, and searched for the results online. And then 1, 8, 17, 24, 32, 45. Each number appeared clearly, a perfect match. I thought I was seeing things, checked again, then checked a third time. I had won. I actually won. $39 million. I should have been jumping up and down, screaming, or at the very least, shouting for joy. But instead, I just stood there. My hands were trembling. My chest felt tight. Instead of excitement, what I felt was fear. I thought about my mom. I thought about all the texts asking for money, then disappearing. I thought about the times I helped and was never once thanked. I thought about every call that only came when someone needed something, and suddenly it hit me. Maybe all this time, I never really knew who truly cared about me. I sat down, stared at my phone. Names scrolled by, familiar names I once held dear. And then I stopped at the first one. Mom. I tapped and held. A little box popped up. Block this contact. And I did it, still holding the lottery ticket worth $39 million in my hand. In all 36 years of my life, I had never kept a secret this big. But the moment I held that lottery ticket in my hand, I knew. If there was one thing I had to keep quiet, this was it. I didn't call anyone, didn't tell a single friend, didn't post a status, no journal entry, no hint of anything unusual. I went to work the next morning like it was any other Tuesday, sat at the same desk, did the same old tasks, still drank the cheap hallway coffee, gave the same tired half smile to my boss, and mumbled a sleepy morning to the receptionist. No one knew. I had just stepped into another world. I don't know how to describe that feeling. It was like carrying a sacred secret, but one that haunted me because I wasn't sure. Was this a blessing or a curse? I'd read too many stories. People who'd once been broke, suddenly rich, only to be drained dry by their own families. Someone once said, "Money doesn't make people worse. It just shows you who they really are." I didn't want to learn that the hard way, but at the same time, I couldn't keep pretending that the relationships around me were ever truly genuine. So I started remembering every little thing, words, glances, those late-night calls asking me to transfer money urgently. The times I sold my favorite bag just to help someone pay hospital bills. The moments I said, "It's okay," when I was completely shattered inside. I remembered the time I couldn't even afford my own meds, but still sent a few $100 to my cousin for her emergency. And not once did I get a thank you. Back then, I didn't think much of it. Just told myself, it's fine. Helping is a good thing. But now, with a ticket worth $39 million in my hand, I finally saw it for what it was. Years of quiet exploitation. Keeping this secret was how I protected myself. For the first time in my life, I chose to protect me, not because I was selfish, but because deep down, I wasn't sure if anyone ever really cared about me when I had nothing left to give. That's why I told no one, not because I didn't trust them, but because I needed to know. Were they ever truly sincere? And to find that out, I had to stay silent. A childhood with Grandma Ruby, the quiet feeling of being left behind. I grew up in the kind of family outsiders would call broken. But to be honest, I never really knew what to call it. My dad left before I was old enough to remember his voice. My mom? She was in and out. She worked all kinds of jobs. Waitressing, cashiering, and later contract nursing. Every new job meant a new house. Every new boyfriend meant learning how to call yet another man uncle. I used to think that was normal, because I didn't know what not normal looked like. Until one day, when I was just 7, my mom left me at my grandmother's, Grandma Ruby's, and said it would be just for a few weeks. Those few weeks lasted a lifetime. There was no goodbye, no explanation. Just an October afternoon, when she told me she'd be back after the weekend. She never came back. I didn't cry. Kids don't always know how to show pain. I just sat quietly on the wooden chair by Grandma Ruby's window, watching the sunlight fade without asking anything, because deep down, I already knew. Grandma Ruby welcomed me with a long hug, then gently placed a bowl of warm soup in front of me. She didn't make promises, didn't badmouth my mom, didn't sugarcoat anything. She simply said, "You can sleep safe here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." At first, I didn't believe her. I was used to being left behind, without warning. Every night, I'd wake up at least once, turn the light on just to check. Was she still in her room? Had she left too? I was afraid of the silence, afraid of doors opening, afraid of her kindness, because it made me feel something I didn't know how to handle. But month after month, she stayed. She still got up early to make cinnamon toast, still brewed peppermint tea when I coughed, still gave me the best cut of meat at dinner without a single complaint. Eventually, I stopped counting the days, stopped waiting for my mom to return. Not because I stopped loving her, but because, for the first time in my life, someone chose to stay. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, just out of love. I started working when I was 19. Not because I wanted to be independent, not because I had some dream of becoming a strong, self-made woman, but simply because I had no other choice. Grandma Ruby was already in her 70s then, sharp-minded, but her health was starting to fade. Right after finishing high school, I enrolled in a short-term accounting course and got a job at a small office 2 blocks from home. My first salary was $1,350 a month. I never imagined a number that small could make me feel both proud and utterly exhausted. I worked full-time and took care of Grandma. Bought her medicine, cooked, cleaned, sometimes even changed light bulbs and fixed leaky faucets. No one ever taught me how to be an adult. But life doesn't wait to ask if you're ready. It just pushes you forward. Then one day, my mother came back. After nearly 7 years of complete silence, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was so gentle, I thought I was dreaming. She didn't ask how I was, didn't ask how Grandma was. She just said, "I'm in a bit of a tight spot. Can you send me $300? And I did. That very night. No guilt trip, no conditions. Then came Kyle, my half-brother from my mom's side, sweeping into my life like a breeze, and turning into a storm. He was in trade school, refused to work, always hanging out with friends. Every now and then, I'd get texts like, "Sis, Mom said you could send me $200 for tuition. Urgent." Or, "I'm out of gas. Test tomorrow. Can you help?" Always urgent. Always, just this one time. I lost count of how many times it was just this once. Every time I tried to say no, I thought of Grandma Ruby's eyes. Everything she sacrificed for me. And I'd ask myself, how can I not sacrifice just a little for my own family? So I sent the money, sent the responsibility, and slowly, I gave away all the boundaries I should have kept for myself. I spent nearly a decade being the one who quietly held everything together. But never once did anyone ask, "Are you tired?" I don't remember exactly when I started going quiet. Maybe it was the first time my mother borrowed money and never paid it back. Or the time my brother promised he'd send the money right after payday, then disappeared for an entire month. At first, I reminded them, and then, slowly, I stopped. I still remember an old friend from high school. She messaged me, panicking, saying she needed funds to open a coffee shop. Told me she just needed a few $100s. "I'll definitely pay you back next month." So, I sent the money. A month later, she posted photos from Bali. The caption read, "Youth is for living your best life." I quietly hit the heart button, never brought up the loan again. I wasn't angry, just tired. Then came my aunt, my mom's younger sister, the one who occasionally called me such a good daughter, but never once asked how I was doing, how much I earned, or whether I was struggling. When she was hospitalized, I was the one who paid the bills. No one asked me to. I just did it, because I thought I was supposed to. And Kyle, my little brother? Don't even get me started. I lost count of how many times I covered his tuition, his car repairs, his phone bills, his "please, sis, this is urgent." He once texted me something I've never forgotten. "If you really care about me, you'll help. Why ask so many questions?" So I stopped asking, and I stopped expecting thank yous. I did all of it like I was paying off some invisible debt, a debt I didn't even understand. There was one time I tried saying no, just once, and the reaction I got? Silent treatment, coldness, and the unmistakable feeling that I only mattered when I said yes. That's when I went quiet. Not because I didn't see what was happening, but because I knew that if I spoke up, they'd call me calculating, selfish, too dramatic. So I chose silence. To keep the peace on the outside, even if, on the inside, I felt like a walking wallet, a wallet shaped like a person, with feelings. But no one seemed to care about that part. About 6 months before I won the lottery, I went through something that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. It was the first time I truly tried to say no, and I paid the price for it. At the time, I had just finished a long round of treatment for a chronic stomach condition. Every month, I had to spend nearly $300 on meds and tests. My salary hadn't changed, but my health was in free fall. I thought maybe it was time to rest, to put myself first, to stop carrying so much weight that wasn't mine to hold. And then, my mom called. That same familiar tone, light, casual, like nothing was ever a big deal. She asked if I could send her $500 to help patch up a little business issue with an old friend. I paused for a few seconds. Then, for the first time in my life, I said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't help this month." Silence. Then, a few seconds later, she spoke, softly, but every word hit like a blade. "Yeah, I get it. Maybe it's time I get used to the idea that you're no longer my daughter." And then she hung up. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, phone in hand, heart racing, not from anger, but from pain. I had braced myself for some guilt tripping. What I didn't expect was how quickly love could be revoked, just because I finally said no. 3 days later, she blocked me on Facebook. 4 days after that, my brother texted, half joking, half blaming. "You've changed, not even rich yet, and already stingy as hell." I cried, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in my life, I realized love with conditions was never love at all. From that day on, I started seeing things differently. I wasn't sure anymore who was sincere, and I no longer believed that kindness could last unless it came with a price tag. I wasn't bitter. I was just more awake. And it was from that moment that the thought of testing people began to creep into my mind, like a survival instinct born from a lifetime of disappointment. I didn't start thinking about testing people out of revenge. I just needed to know, if one day I had nothing left to give, would anyone still stay? The thought came naturally. No drama, no detailed plan. Just one night, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, and a single question echoed in my mind. If I disappeared from their lives, with no money, no promises, would anyone come looking for me? That question haunted me. I spent a week rereading old messages, scrolling through my bank history, taking note of the money I'd given, not to reclaim it, but to understand how much of myself I had poured out. Then I made a list. 8 people, family, close friends. All of them had, in one way or another, benefited from my help. I decided to create a story. I would tell them I had lost everything, that I'd made a terrible investment, got talked into it by an ex-boyfriend, signed some papers without thinking. Now the contract's gone, and so is all the money. I'd say I was behind on rent, owed medical bills for Grandma Ruby, and needed $4,000 in 3 days or I'd be kicked out of my apartment. I knew I wasn't much of an actress. But pain? Pain doesn't need acting. I just let the old disappointments flow through my voice. I would call each of them. No texting, no emails. I needed to hear their voices. The hesitation, the coldness, the pity, or maybe, just maybe, something real. I wasn't expecting perfection. I was only hoping for a little honesty. Grandma Ruby was the only one I chose not to test. Not because I was sure she'd help, but because, if even she was in doubt, then I'd have nothing left worth holding on to. I didn't need the money. I needed the truth. And sometimes, if you want to know who's real, you have to pretend. You've got nothing left to lose. I started making the calls on a Thursday afternoon, one by one, not too quickly, not too slow. Between each call, I gave myself a few hours to calm down and to give them some time to think. No one knew it was a test, and none of them knew. The person testing them was the same person who had helped them more than once in the past. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. Maybe a sincere question. "Where are you? I'll come get you." Or something as simple as, "Have you eaten?" But what I got was far from that. One answered the phone with a voice cold as a stranger. Another listened to the story, then said, "Damn, that sucks. Let me see what I can do." And then, silence. One even cut me off mid-sentence, said they were driving, and promised to call back. I knew there would be no call back. I set the phone down on the table, just staring at it as if I were waiting for some kind of miracle. Not for money, but for a sign, something, anything that showed I had value, even when I had nothing left to offer. But every time the screen flashed "seen" and nothing followed, It felt like I was peeling away the last fragile layer of belief I still had in people. I didn't cry, but something inside me was cracking. Not a dramatic, shattering break, but small, quiet fractures. Deep, invisible, and impossible to heal. And then, for the first time in my life, I understood something. Waiting for love from people who only know how to take is how you end up breaking your own heart. The first person I called was my aunt, my mom's older sister. She had lived with us for a few years during my childhood, and I'd always thought she was the closest relative I had on my mother's side. She once said I was the only well-mannered niece in the family. She had borrowed money from me twice when her son was unemployed. Both times, I wired the money that same day. No questions, no expectations of repayment. I tapped the call button. My hand trembled slightly. Just yesterday, I was arranging Grandma Ruby's medical bills, and now today, I had to pretend that I didn't even have a single dollar to my name. That made me feel small, vulnerable, and honestly, guilty. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hello? Who's this?" Her voice, loud as always. "Hi, it's Elena. How are you, Auntie?" "Oh, hey. What's up, sweetheart?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't exactly warm either. I took a deep breath, then began the story I had rehearsed for nights on end. "Things haven't been good lately. I got scammed, bad investment, lost all my savings. I'm behind on rent. The doctor's threatening to cut treatment if I don't pay. I need $4,000 just to make it through the month. I didn't know who else to call, so I called you." Silence. Half a minute, a full minute, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she said, "Oh, honey, I'm struggling too. I haven't even sorted out stuff for my own kids. Where would I find money to help an outsider?" Outsider? I froze. Couldn't say a word. "Anyway, I've got another call coming in. I'll ask your uncle about it, but don't count on it." Click. I sat still. The word outsider kept replaying in my head like a tiny splinter. Not sharp enough to make me scream, but just deep enough to make my chest ache with every breath. That was the first call. And it was when I realized I wasn't just testing them. I was peeling back memories, the kind I had always tried to believe were beautiful. After the first call, I thought I was emotionally prepared. But I was wrong. Because some wounds don't come from cruelty, but from half-hearted kindness. The second person I called was my cousin, Meredith. We used to be really close. I once helped her pay off her credit card debt because she was scared of damaging her credit score. She picked up quickly, her voice soft. "Oh my gosh, sis. It's been forever. Why haven't you called me?" I told her the same story, still shaky, still hesitating just enough to sound real. Meredith went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I totally get it, but I'm trying to cover wedding costs right now. We just placed the deposit on the venue, and honestly, we're stretched thin. Hope you understand." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, then replied, "It's okay. I understand." And I truly did. I understood that even when you're drowning in the middle of the ocean, people will still choose to keep their shoes dry. Next, I called my cousin Daniel. He'd recently bragged about buying a brand new car. When he answered, he said, "Wow, that's rough. But I just pulled all my money from investments. And honestly, you really need to be more careful. You can't just trust people like that." It sounded like advice, but it made me feel like I was being blamed for a situation I had made up. I hung up, not sure which part hurt more, that they didn't help, or that they made me feel guilty for needing help. I started to understand. Some rejections don't come from the words themselves, but from the distance they create with polished politeness. And sometimes, that politeness hurts more than honesty ever could. There's a kind of rejection that doesn't come through words, but through the eyes, the tone of voice, and the subtle way someone maintains distance so skillfully. The fifth person I reached out to was my cousin, Vanessa. When we were kids, she used to give me rides to school on her bicycle. There was one time I was sick, and she secretly slipped a peppermint candy into my pocket before class. I still remember that moment, though she's probably long forgotten it. When I called, she picked up right away, even sounding anxious. "Why does your voice sound shaky? Is something wrong?" I told her, slowly, truthfully. She sighed, then replied in a hesitant voice, "I really care about you, but we're also trying to cover Sue's tuition. My husband just switched jobs and his income isn't stable yet." And then she added, "I wish I could do something. You know, I was once in a similar situation myself." The story shifted from mine to hers. I listened, politely, but my heart slowly cooled. A part of me wanted to scream. I don't need sympathy stories. I need help. But all I said was, "It's okay. I understand." The next person, an old best friend. We used to share everything except the truth of this moment. She listened intently, then said, "I wish I were rich so I could help you, but right now, I can't even pay off my credit card." I smiled, a faint smile. No resentment, no anger. Just this. When you've heard enough expressions of love that never come with action, you start to realize you're not someone they truly need. You're someone who makes them feel guilty, and guilt has never been strong enough to move someone to truly help. The last person I reached out to was Marcus, my older brother. We were never close, but we grew up under the same roof. Not many warm memories, but no bad blood either. I remember the times when I was sick, and he'd quietly place a cold towel on my forehead. How he always stepped back to let me have the better portion at dinner. He was the kind of person who never said "I love you," but always showed up when Grandma Ruby needed a ladder or someone to patch the roof or unclog the gutters after heavy rain. I didn't call. I knew he hated talking on the phone. Instead, I sent a short text. No guilt, no pressure. "I'm in a bit of trouble. If you're able, I need $4,000 in the next few days. It's okay if you can't help." The message was sent at 10:04 a.m. 2 minutes later, seen, and then nothing. 1 hour passed, then 2, afternoon, then an entire day. I didn't text again, didn't call back. I just stared at the words "seen" as if they were a door shut from the inside. Not locked, but not open either. Just cold. I don't know what made him stay silent. Maybe it was discomfort, maybe shame, or maybe he just didn't want to get involved. But whatever the reason, that moment he knew I was desperate and still chose silence. It told me everything I needed to know. Rejection isn't always a no. Sometimes it's just a scene and the long absence that follows. I looked back at the list of 8 names, 8 calls, 8 messages, 8 endings that all felt the same. Each response, a tiny slice to the heart. And Marcus was the final cut. I didn't include Grandma Ruby in the test. From the very beginning, I crossed her name off the plan. Not because she was too poor to help, but because if I had to test even her, then maybe I had nothing left worth believing in. I didn't tell her. didn't text, didn't call. I tried to keep her out of the mess I had created, but she still called. That night, just after I put down my phone, still reeling from the final string of disappointments, the screen lit up. And there it was, Grandma Ruby. I froze, phone in hand, heart racing. I was afraid she'd ask, afraid that just hearing her voice would break me, but I answered anyway. "Hi, Grandma?" I tried to keep my voice steady, though my chest was pounding. "Elena, are you okay?" Her voice was the same as always, gentle and firm, like a place you could lean on. "I heard you left your job. Is something wrong, sweetheart?" I went quiet for a moment, then said simply, "Yeah, I'm a little short on money. Ran into some trouble." There were no follow-up questions. No. "What happened?" No. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" No. "Was this your fault?" Just silence. Then she said, as if she'd already decided, "I've got around $2,000 in my savings. I'll go to the bank tomorrow and send it over. If you need more, I'll figure something out." I couldn't speak. Not because of the money, but because of how quickly she said it, without hesitation. Then she added, "If you're tired, come home. Your room's still the same. No one dared to touch it." I turned my face toward the wall, so my tears wouldn't soak the pillow. I didn't say a word, because for the first time in days, I felt chosen. Not for what I had, but simply for who I was. She didn't ask for details, but she knew everything. And in a world where people only love when there's something to gain, her quiet, unwavering love was the only truth that remained. The next morning, I was still lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. I didn't think much of it, probably just an ad or a reminder to pay a bill. But no, there it was, clear and direct. Credit transaction, plus $2,000. Sender, Ruby M. Carver. I froze. I had grown used to rejection, to being ignored, to standing on the outside of people's priorities. I had braced myself for yet another silent no. But Grandma, she didn't say a word. She just acted. I knew she didn't have money to spare. If anything, she was struggling. She once told me, "Every month I save a little, just in case I get sick or have to fix the roof." That little was all she had. And now she had poured all of that just in case into this moment for me. Still trying to take it all in, I got home that afternoon and saw a small envelope tucked under the door. My name was written on it in that familiar, slanted handwriting. I opened it, a piece of paper, folded in thirds. Not long, not wordy. "Dear Elena, I don't need to know what happened. I just need to know you're in need and that I'm still here. Come home if you're tired. Your room is the same. Love, Grandma." I read it over and over, my hands shaking. It felt like someone had quietly reached in and peeled away every layer of armor I'd wrapped around myself all week. No blame, no lectures, no questions, just a steady, silent presence. I sat down on the floor, back against the door. Didn't break down like in the movies. No sobbing, no screaming, just tears. Falling gently, streaming down my cheeks, silent and freeing. Because for the first time, after days of running myself in circles, after pushing and testing and hurting, I realized real love doesn't need proof. It doesn't come with conditions. and it doesn't ask for explanations. And sometimes, a handwritten letter and $2,000 from savings carry more weight than 40 million sitting in my hands. I sank down to the floor as if my body had finally run out of strength to keep holding everything in. Grandma Ruby's little card was still in my hand, warm, soft, with the faint scent of old paper. I had read it more times than I could count, and yet it still wasn't enough. Each time I read it, another layer of my defenses quietly fell away. Elena, if you really need help, I can give a little. Not much, but it's everything I have. You never have to feel ashamed about coming home. I'll always be here. Tucked inside that card were $2,000, almost her entire savings. I knew, with painful clarity, that she didn't have extra to spare. And the more I knew that, the harder it became to hold back the tears. But I wasn't crying because I was hurt. I was crying because I felt seen. No judgment, no interrogation, just me, and still loved. I remembered something from when I was around 8. One day, my mom forgot to pick me up from school. It was pouring. I stood under the awning, cold and small and aching. I didn't call Mom. I called Grandma Ruby. She didn't scold anyone, didn't ask questions. She just brought the thickest coat she had, took my hand, and walked me home. In the rain. On the way, she told stories from when she was young, laughing out loud as if her laughter could hide the anger she knew I felt. She didn't try to make me happy. She just stayed beside me, and that was enough. Now, once again, just like back then, I didn't explain. She didn't ask. She simply sent a small sum, along with a message that weighed more than any amount of help ever could. You don't have to prove anything to be loved. That sentence felt like a gentle hand on my shoulder in the middle of the night. I never expected the biggest lesson in this entire journey of winning the lottery would come from someone who didn't even know I had become rich. I placed the card over my heart. Tears slipped down my cheeks, quietly, and in that moment, I knew. Even if the whole world turned away, there was still one place where I could simply be. No pretending, no perfection, just me. It's been a year since I received that card from Grandma Ruby. Looking back, the memory still tightens my chest, as if that moment marked the beginning of an entirely different life. I no longer live in that cramped old apartment. I've bought a small condo on the edge of the city, not far from downtown, but quiet enough for me to hear birds in the morning and watch sunlight pour through the curtains. The furniture isn't extravagant or flashy, but every item has been chosen with care. A beige sofa, a wooden bookshelf filled with novels and memoirs, and a small writing desk where I often journal in silence. I've picked up the habit of walking each morning. I usually stop by a little coffee shop where the owner knows me by name. He always asks, "Elena, window seat today or your usual corner?" That simple question means more to me than 100 hollow greetings. I choose to live in presence, not in luxury, not in the noise of extravagant parties or hollow relationships dressed in glitter. Of course, the money is still there. The $39 million I won hasn't gone anywhere. But I've learned to see it as a tool, not a weapon to test others, not a mirror to flaunt myself. Money gives me freedom, but I am still the one who chooses who I want to become. As for my family, they're the same. They don't call asking for loans anymore, but the distance is clear. At first, it hurt, but over time, I realized not every crack needs to be sealed. Some gaps are meant to stay, like fences that protect the heart. On the other hand, I spend more time with Grandma Ruby. We plant flowers in her backyard, make simple lunches together, sometimes just toast and hot soup. And every time I see her smile, eyes wrinkled with joy, I know deep in my soul, I was right to place my trust in her. 1 year after winning the lottery, I've come to understand I didn't change because I had more money. I changed because I chose to live with intention, to choose peace over noise, love over suspicion, and most of all, truth over performance, to stay honest with myself. One afternoon in May, as I was tending to the rose pots on my balcony, the doorbell rang. Suddenly, I opened the door, and standing there was Mason, my cousin, the one I used to be as close to as a brother, the same person who had hurt me deeply during last year's test of trust. Mason looked different. Gone was the confident, slick version of him who always talked about get-rich-quick ventures. In front of me now stood a thin, sunken-eyed man, his shoulders slumped, his voice hoarse. "Elena, can I come in for a bit?" "Just to talk?" I hesitated. In an instant, memories came rushing back. His relentless calls, his bitter words when I said no, and the way he turned his back on me the moment I didn't hand over the money. I had promised myself he would never get another chance to walk into my life. But seeing him now, shaky and lost like a man without a map, I couldn't bring myself to shut the door. I nodded. Let him in. We sat in the living room in silence for a long while. Mason looked around at the space that wasn't fancy, but neat, warm, and calm. Then he let out a sigh. "I've lost everything, Elena. My job, my friends, even my family. I know I messed up, especially with you. But now, I have no one else to turn to." I stayed quiet. Inside me, a storm raged. The wounded part of me wanted to shut him out, forever. But another part, the part I had nurtured over the past year with peace and love, whispered, "Maybe this is the real test, to see just how much you've grown." I looked him in the eyes. "I can't erase the past, Mason. But I don't want to carry hate forever either. If you truly want a new beginning, I'm willing to listen. But you'll have to prove it, not with words, but with action." Mason lowered his head. Tears fell onto his hands, and in that moment, for the first time in years, I saw him truly break. It was then that I understood something. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the wrong. It's about giving yourself the right to let go of the anger. And maybe leaving a small door open for Mason wasn't just a test for him, but for me, to see if my compassion was strong enough to lead us both toward healing. Elena sat in the chair at the far end of the living room. A soft golden light from the chandelier bathed her face, casting a quiet separation that words couldn't quite describe. No one in the room noticed that her eyes had changed. No more worry, no more urgency, only a quiet, steady kind of detachment. She glanced around the room. Each familiar face suddenly looked strange in a way that sent chills down her spine. Her older sister, the one who always spoke sweetly, was now forcing a polite smile, delicately declining. Her brother, once full of easy generosity, now fumbled through excuses, his eyes avoiding hers. Even her own mother, the one Elena had trusted most, hesitated, shook her head softly, anxiously. Only Aunt Marlene remained, sitting still, her thin, veined hands wrapped tightly around Elena's. A wave rose inside Elena's chest. She didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't blame. She simply sat there, listening, to each sigh, to each awkward laugh, to every half-hearted word spoken just to fill the silence. With every passing second, the truth became sharper. Love is fragile, and when tested, the masks fall. In that stillness, Elena became the outsider, watching her own family perform a clumsy little play. Everything laid itself bare. There was no need for her to say a single word. Her heart ached, but also felt light, Painful, yes, because the truth was harsh, but freeing because finally, she saw the faces beneath the masks. Elena closed her eyes. A faint smile touched her lips, and she whispered, just loud enough for herself to hear, "All right, that's enough." Elena left the living room as night had fully settled outside. Her steps were slow, but her heart felt heavy. The rejections, the averted gazes, still echoed in her mind like a recording she couldn't turn off. She stood by her bedroom window, staring out at the still, sleeping garden. She had never felt it so clearly before. Wealth, money, even blood, none of it guarantees sincerity. She thought back to the years behind her, the endless days of hard work, dreaming of a life beyond struggle, saving every penny, hoping that one day life would finally smile back. Winning the lottery had felt like a miracle, but that miracle had opened another door, a door that led her straight to the truth about the people she once held dearest. Elena let out a long breath and placed a hand over her chest. Right there, her heart still beat, strong, steady, reminding her, even if the world turns away, I still have me. In that moment, she understood something. The real value of trust isn't measured by how much money you can give. It's found in the willingness to stay, even when there's nothing to gain. A vision of Aunt Marlene surfaced in her mind. Those aged but resolute eyes, that quiet voice carrying an unconditional kind of faith. Just one sentence, "I believe in you." And somehow, that was enough to warm Elena in the bitter cold of betrayal. She smiled, not a forced smile, but one of quiet relief. Because now she knew, sometimes one sincere soul is worth more than a dozen hollow relatives. Elena whispered to herself, money can change everything, but it also shows you who was willing to stay. The words echoed in her head, not as bitterness, not as regret, but as clarity, like the first ray of morning breaking through the night. She turned back to her desk and opened an old notebook. Carefully, she began to write, line by line. Today, I finally understood that family doesn't always mean trust. The words flowed, and with them came a strange, peaceful quiet. The next morning, Elena woke earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered softly through the window, resting on a face still touched by the fatigue of a long, sleepless night. But in her eyes, for the first time in weeks, there was clarity. She walked to the kitchen and made herself a cup of coffee. The scent filled the room, gentle and calming, like it was soothing every bruise inside her chest. Elena knew it was time to make a decision, not just to escape the spiral of doubt, but to finally begin a life that truly belonged to her. She opened the notebook she'd written in the night before, reading each trembling line. Every sentence felt like an etching, a reminder that she had walked through betrayal, through loneliness, and still found a spark of trust in Aunt Marlene. But knowing that wasn't enough. She needed to turn this pain into fuel, to chart a new direction. Elena sat quietly for a long while, then opened her laptop and began searching. Charity foundations, programs for underprivileged children, projects supporting single mothers. And then a thought flickered in her mind. If that money revealed the true faces of some, maybe it can also light the path for those who truly deserve hope. An idea began to take shape. She wouldn't use the $39 million to buy fake affection, but to build something lasting, a legacy of trust and compassion. In that moment, Elena felt something ease inside her. She was no longer bound by the expectations of her family, nor by the need to prove herself to those who had turned away. Instead, she chose a different path, to live kindly, but strong enough to set boundaries. At exactly 8 a.m., Elena closed the notebook. She stood up, slipped into a simple coat, and walked out the door. No longer the confused woman trapped in a storm of doubt, but a new Elena. Clear, decisive, unshakably determined. And as she stepped into the morning light, she whispered to herself, "Starting today, everything changes." That afternoon, Elena returned home after a long walk around the city. Her steps were lighter, her mind no longer weighed down by the burdens it once carried. In her hand was a small bag, just a few books and a tiny potted plant, something she'd never paid attention to before. She placed the little plant on the windowsill, watching as its vibrant green gently brightened the room. That simple moment brought her a strange peace, and suddenly, she understood. Happiness isn't the number in your bank account. It's the quiet certainty that you're living a life that feels right. That evening, as she sat down for dinner, Elena opened her phone. Messages from relatives still sat there, unread. Blame, accusations, resentment. But strangely, they no longer stung. She smiled gently, then deleted them, one by one. Not out of coldness, but as a quiet act of letting go. Letting go of pointless expectations, fake obligations, and the pain that had kept her silent for so long. Later that night, Elena made herself a cup of warm tea, then stepped out onto the balcony to watch the city lights begin to glow. The noise, the traffic, the scattered sounds of life faded into the background, leaving room for a stillness she hadn't felt in a very long time. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time, felt truly free. Somewhere deep inside, Elena realized, only when we release what once chained us, can we finally make space for something new. True wealth wasn't the $39 million. It was the power to choose, to live in peace, to love with discernment, and to move forward with a heart no longer burdened. Elena woke up earlier than usual. Soft sunlight filtered through the white curtains, casting a warm golden hue across the wooden floor. For the first time in weeks, her heart wasn't weighed down by why or what if. Everything in the apartment remained the same. The little plant on the windowsill, the familiar armchair, the old photo hanging on the wall. But one thing had changed. Her. After brewing a cup of coffee, Elena sat at her desk, once piled with financial reports and worry. Today, only a notebook and a pen remained. She opened the notebook and wrote the first lines. "I am no longer the old version of myself. I am someone learning how to live again, how to trust, how to love, and this time, for me." Each stroke of the pen was slow but certain. No more plans made for others, only promises made to herself. She changed into a simple dress, tied her hair neatly, and stepped outside. The sky was clear. The city buzzed as always, but every step Elena took now felt steadier, lighter, as if she had finally taken off the heavy backpack she'd been carrying for years. Just before crossing the street, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Hi, Elena. This is Ava, Martha's niece. She told me a lot about you. I have something I'd like to share." Elena froze. The early autumn breeze brushed her shoulder, as if signaling a new chapter was about to begin. She smiled softly, no longer afraid, no longer guarded, only ready.